This practical is called anion identification. And the aim of it, as you can see, is to investigate the reactions of negative ions, or anions, with positive cations, barium, silver and hydrogen, and to identify the anions present in two unknown solutions. So these are the solutions that we're going to test against, find out what they do, and then we've got some unknowns here to try and find out what they are. Now, our first step is to place 1 drop of 0.1 molar sodium carbonate, sodium chloride, sodium hydroxide, sodium iodide, sodium nitrate, sodium phosphate and sodium sulfate solutions on different white squares on the laminated sheet. Then we're going to repeat this for the solutions on a black square. Well, to each drop on the sheet we will add 1 drop of barium nitrate solution and record the presence and the colour of any precipitate that is formed. So let's give that a try. First of all, 1 drop of sodium carbonate. Secondly, sodium chloride. Thirdly, hydroxide. Fourthly, sodium iodide. Next, sodium nitrate. After that, we have sodium phosphate. Then we have sodium sulfate. And we'll do the same for the black areas. So we'll start with sodium carbonate, 1 drop of sodium chloride, 1 drop of sodium hydroxide, 1 drop of sodium iodide, then sodium nitrate, sodium phosphate and sodium sulfate. Now we'll add 1 drop of barium nitrate to each one of these. That's 2. All right, this one here, you can see the white colour, and we'll record that as a precipitate with sodium carbonate. No precipitate with sodium chloride. Some precipitate with sodium hydroxide. No precipitate with sodium iodide. No precipitate with sodium nitrate. White precipitate, strong precipitate with sodium phosphate, and a strong precipitate with barium sulfate. When we have a look at these ones, because of the background, it's rather difficult to establish that there is a precipitate, but certainly we can see precipitates there. Our next test is to each precipitate on the sheet add 2 drops of 1 molar nitric acid solution. So those are the ones there where we've got the white. So adding 2 drops. Now, what's happened? Well, this one here, it seems that the precipitate has dissolved. Similarly for the other ones, apart from our last one here, which was sodium sulfate. So our sodium sulfate there does not seem to have dissolved. Let's have a look at the next one. So looking now at step 6, we can add to our plastic sheet here 1 drop of sodium carbonate, 1 drop of sodium chloride, 1 drop of sodium hydroxide, 1 drop of sodium iodide, 1 drop of sodium nitrate. This is sodium phosphate. And finally, sodium sulfate. Then to each of these, a drop of silver nitrate. So very obvious precipitates in a number of solutions. Let's now try adding 2 drops of nitric acid. So it's fairly clear that this one, sodium chloride, we have no dissolving of the precipitate. This one here, which is sodium iodide, again, no dissolving of the precipitate. Here, very obvious bubbles. Even here we can see them. Let's have a look at the unknowns now. I'm going to start by taking unknown A and putting a drop on the square. Then unknown B, unknown C, unknown D, 2 drops there, unknown E, and unknown F. Again, I should have done the same thing up here at the same time. And we'll add our first reagent there, which of course was barium nitrate. So that was a barium nitrate. This one here we can see with A, we've got a clear precipitate, and with D, we have a very obvious precipitate as well. Bit hard to see whether or not the same applies over here. This one here, C, unknown C, looks as if it's got a slight precipitate. Well, let's try with the next test then, which is to add 2 drops of nitric acid to where we have a precipitate. Here's our nitric acid. So we've got a precipitate here, 2 drops. Slight precipitate here, so I'll add 2 drops. 2 drops here. So certainly with nitric acid, we've got whatever was there certainly disappeared. This one here seems to produce bubbles. Over here, we've still got a precipitate. So that's our first reagent. The next thing which we'll have a look at is with the silver. So I've got now the new set of drops again, A, B, C, D, E, F, A, B, C, D, E, F. And what I'm going to do now is add the silver nitrate, a drop of silver nitrate. Might have added 2 there. Well, as we have a look here, we can see that with F, certainly we've got a precipitate, and with C, we've got a precipitate, and then these are the ones here, very obvious precipitates, a green one there. So let's add now 1 drop, or 2 drops of nitric acid to each of these, where there is a precipitate. So there's a precipitate here, 2 drops. Right, that looks as if it's dissolved. Still yellow there. Let's add it to these ones. Dissolved, precipitate dissolved there, better add 2, that's the instructions. Okay, and this, so that was D. E. And F. I'm giving that a bit of a shake just to make sure that the reagents mix. Well, that looks as if some of it's dissolved. The other ones there clearly are dissolved. This one here hasn't really dissolved. Still plenty of it there, so maybe partly dissolved there. And now the task is to identify what the anions, the negative ions, are in each of those solutions.